Batman Arkham Origins had the potential to be something grand, maybe even rivaling Arkham City in density and emotion, but it ended up tripping over its own feet. When Warner Brothers, Montreal took over the project, there was an air of expectation and distrust. Rocksteady had raised the bar too high, and any deviation from the formula already caused strangeness. From the first contact in Arkham Origins, you can feel this tension between wanting to maintain the essence of the trilogy and, at the same tempo, trying to prove something new. But the game never seems to decide who it wants to be. A technical and narrative expansion of Arkham City's legacy, or just a safe and functional copy of it. The biggest waste, for me, is in the narrative. The story starts full of potential, with the premise of 8 assassins hired to kill Batman on a single Christmas Eve. A cinematic hook, with room for tension, drama, and introspection. But the script doesn't dive into it as it should. The idea of the assassins falls into the villain of the week cliché, with encounters that add little to the character's journey. Except for specific moments, like the confrontation with Deathstroke. The story gets lost in an irregular pace, with no sense of urgency. And the focus ends up returning to the Joker, as if the writers didn't trust their own plot. It's almost as if the game is saying, we don't know what to do without him, which weakens the proposal of showing a younger, more brutal Bruce Wayne. Even the combat, the mechanical heart of the series, although still satisfying, shows signs of wear. The system is practically a copy of Arkham City, but without the same polish. The fluidity of the blows suffers in some animations, and the enemies tend to repeat patterns so predictably that the challenge is lost. If the combat is still fun, it's only because the foundation created by Rocksteady was too solid to be ruined. But combat that's good by inertia isn't enough. It lacked daring, new mechanics, something that would translate the raw, more instinctive stage of this Batman in training. Origins tries, but it doesn't feel the weight of youth. It feels the weight of fatigue. Still, there are flashes of brilliance. Moments like the first contact with the Joker or the relationship between Batman and Alfred have real emotional weight. That's where the game shows what it could have been. A psychological study of the birth of a legend, a dark Christmas tale about loneliness and purpose. But these moments don't last long and end up overshadowed by rushed decisions. It's as if the game had a powerful soul, but a poorly sewn together body. When the final credits roll, there's that feeling of emptiness, of almost a classic, almost a masterpiece. Batman Arkham Origins is one of those experiences that frustrates more for its promise than for its result. It's not a bad game, but it's the portrait of a studio that wanted to carry a torch that was too heavy. A younger, more violent, and less refined Batman deserved a narrative worthy of that concept, not a shadow of what came before. It's a game that shines in its ideas, but fades in its execution. And maybe that's why it's remembered more for its absence in conversations than for its own merits. Arkham Origins tries to approach a more human and flawed side of the character, directly inspired by the comics Batman Earth 1 and Batman Year 1. These comics are known for portraying an inexperienced Bruce Wayne, still impulsive, far from the almost mythical figure he would become. And the game incorporates this essence clearly. A less refined, more brutal Batman, still learning the balance between justice and obsession. The idea itself is excellent, as it creates an interesting contrast with the calculating hero we saw in the previous games. But the problem is that this youth never fully translates into the mechanics or the narrative rhythm. The concept gets stuck in superficiality. In Earth 1 and Year 1, the great charm lies in Bruce's mistakes, in his failures while trying to be the symbol he doesn't yet fully understand. In Arkham Origins, this is present in the dialogues and some cutscenes, but rarely in the gameplay. The game's Batman still fights and investigates like a veteran. He doesn't make serious mistakes in combat or show tactical uncertainties. This disconnect between narrative and gameplay weakens the proposal. The writer wants to show us a Batman in training, but the player controls someone already mastering all the techniques. This prevents the player from feeling the learning curve, the emotional and physical maturation that should be the backbone of this phase of his story. The influence of these comics also appears in the way Gotham is portrayed. A city that is less baroque and more dirty, decadent, almost realistic. This approximation with the noir tone of Year 1 is a visual success, but the game doesn't seem to know what to do with this setting. The city is cold but not intimidating, large but not alive. It lacks the sense of transformation that permeates the novice Batman of the comics, that moment when the city begins to react to the vigilante's presence. In Arkham Origins, Gotham is just a backdrop, not an active character. This lack of atmosphere weakens the drama, and removes the emotional impact of the events. Another consequence of these influences is the way the relationship between Bruce and Alfred was shaped. Just like in Earth 1, Alfred is more skeptical, harsher, almost a rival to Bruce's mission. The game correctly captures this conflict, but explores it hastily. The philosophical clash about the extent to which personal sacrifice is worth it to become a symbol is only hinted at, never really lived. Everything happens too quickly, and the player barely has time to absorb the hero's doubts. It's as if the game was afraid to slow down to let the weight of the relationships blossom. And that's a shame, because there was room for something much more emotional, something that would give soul to this young Batman. These choices also create an imbalance in the construction of the villains. The concept of a Batman still on the rise called for antagonists who would challenge him morally and psychologically, not just physically. But in trying to copy the intensity of the classic comics, the game ends up bringing in the Joker too early, stealing the spotlight from the hero's coming-of-age journey. It was the ideal time to develop figures like Black Mask, Anarchy, or Deathstroke as emblems of the different faces of chaos in Gotham. Instead, the game returns to the safe old ground of the Joker as the ultimate symbol of conflict. And this return to the comfort zone reduces the narrative's originality. The curious thing is that the presence of the inspirations is so clear and respectful that, at certain moments, Arkham Origins almost seems like a sincere homage. The visual references, the scenes that echo the comics, and even the tone of loneliness that permeates Bruce have artistic strength. But a good inspiration needs to be adapted, not copied. And the game fails at this. It doesn't reinterpret the themes, it just repeats them. Thus, the visual and thematic concept of the comics becomes a limit instead of a creative starting point. The result is a plot that seems to depend too much on the original material without developing its own voice. In the end, this dependent relationship with Earth 1 and Year 1 leaves Arkham Origins trapped between two worlds. It wants to explore the vulnerability of a Batman at the beginning of his career, but it still behaves like a grand action spectacle. It wants to be introspective, but it's afraid of pauses and silence. The game delivers glimpses of a mature drama, full of potential, but retreats whenever it could go deeper. It's as if the spirit of the comics was there, floating above the project but without completely merging with it.
This tension between inspiration and insecurity defines the identity of Arkham Origins, a beautiful but inconclusive portrait of who Batman was destined to be.
Batman Arkham Origins is a clear example of how good ideas can be suffocated by poorly executed game design. The most evident feeling while playing is that everything could be bigger, better, and more cohesive. But the final result feels like a step back. When compared to Arkham City, the mission design, the map flow, and even the logic of the open world are noticeably inferior. There's a truncated rhythm, a scattered progression system, and a lack of purpose in the side activities. All this makes the game sound more like a rushed supplement to a previous success than an autonomous and mature work. It's frustrating to see so much potential wasted on structural decisions that limit the player's immersion. The map is perhaps the ultimate symbol of these problems. Divided into two regions connected by an immense and charmless bridge, it tries to be bigger than Arkham City, but it doesn't become more interesting for it. It's a vast and empty space, saturated by repetition. The alleys seem cloned, the buildings are generic, and the layout seems made more to fill an area than to tell a visual story of Gotham. And worst of all, navigation is tiresome. The Batwing only serves as a simplified fast travel system, without the charm or the feeling of mastery the player had in the previous games. The map in Origins doesn't invite exploration. It just exists. And that's a serious flaw for a title that depends so much on urban atmosphere. The side missions suffer from the same problem. The idea was to expand the young Batman's journey, facing criminals in different parts of the city and solving crimes that would test his detective skills. In practice, the activities repeat exhaustively. It's the same enemies and the same scenarios, the same combat patterns and investigations that are solved automatically without requiring any real deduction from the player. The crime system, which had the potential to bring out the character's more investigative side, is reduced to following markers and pressing buttons. The lack of variety turns what should be an engaging experience into a mechanical and predictable routine. The gameplay also contributes to the frustration. Despite following the solid foundation created by Rocksteady, Arkham Origins fails in the details. The control response is inconsistent. The parry system fails at crucial moments, and there's a noticeable delay between command and action. This completely breaks the characteristic rhythm of the series, which was always fluid and gratifying. It's hard not to feel angry when the game fails at something that previously seemed natural. The combat is still functional, but it has lost the touch of refinement that made each confrontation a precise dance. The result is an experience that feels disconnected from what came before, as if it were made by someone who understood the appearance, but not the feeling, of the mechanic. Even the boss design, which should be the game's high point, carries this irregularity. Some confrontations, like the one with Deathstroke, show what Arkham Origins could have been: tense, cinematic, and full of personality. But then come frustrating battles, too long, based on repetition, or poorly balanced. It seems the design team didn't have a cohesive concept of what they wanted to deliver. Moments of spectacle or challenges of precision. This constant oscillation undermines the impact of the bosses and contributes to the feeling of a project without a clear direction. In the end, what hurts most about Arkham Origins is realizing that its great sin isn't simply being smaller than the others, but being a game that didn't find its own identity. The design tries to repeat Arkham City without understanding why that game worked so well. Everything in Origins seems like a technical recreation, but without the soul that connected the narrative, visual, and mechanical elements. It's a game that exists in the shadow of a giant and never tries to step out of it. Therefore, the inevitable comparison transforms it into something akin to a DLC that was stretched too thin, diluted in a purposeless map and recycled missions. This feeling of a misused DLC is no exaggeration. It's almost a fair definition. Even with a promising plot and good isolated moments, Arkham Origins is a prisoner of lazy design and choices that prioritized quantity over quality. It doesn't fail for lack of ambition, but for lack of coherence between what it promised and what it delivered. It's a game that never finds its own tone, and for that reason, ends up being remembered as the weak link in a franchise that always stood out precisely for its excellence in design. Arkham Origins still carries a stain that is hard to erase, that of being the most technically problematic game in the entire franchise. Since its launch, it was surrounded by reports of bugs that ranged from annoying to disastrous. And the most surprising thing is that, more than 10 years later, many of these errors still remain. Warner Bros. Montreal, at that time, seemed overwhelmed and without the same technical mastery that Rocksteady had achieved with the previous titles. The result was a game that, even with good ideas and a polished atmosphere, constantly collapses due to basic optimization failures. The experience can be atmospheric and engaging for a few minutes, but all it takes is a collision bug or a crash during combat to completely break the spell. These technical problems are so recurrent that they have become part of Arkham Origins' identity. There are crashes during action scenes, enemies that disappear from the map, hit detections that fail, sharp drops in frame rate, and even corrupted save issues. In an action game that depends on fluidity and precision, any one of these flaws would already be serious, and Arkham Origins brings them all together. The feeling is that the game was released without the proper final testing phase, with pending adjustments that were never corrected. It's the kind of error that ages poorly, especially when the community realizes that new patches never came. Unlike the other games in the series, which remained technically solid over the years, Origins was frozen in a state of near functionality. Even current platforms with much more powerful hardware can't hide the lack of optimization. I revisited the title in 2025 and found the same performance problems that existed on PC and last-gen consoles. Textures are slow to load, the frame rate plummets in open areas, and the collision system remains inconsistent. This shows that the problem wasn't a lack of capability at the time, but structural flaws in development. Arkham Origins never received the same care or technical support as its franchise siblings. It seems to have been discarded after fulfilling its role as a stopgap between two major releases. And this technical abandonment is one of the biggest disappointments of the series. In the field of gameplay, the consequences of this lack of polish are clear. The combat is the same acclaimed system, but with a sense of input lag. The commands don't flow with the same precision. The counterattacks fail to register the input, and the control loses that almost choreographed synchronization that defined the Arkham trilogy. In a series where the pleasure comes precisely from the smoothness of the rhythm between strikes, blocks, and finishers, Arkham Origins becomes frustrating. The feeling is that we are playing a test version of the combat system, as if something there hadn't gone through the same technical rigor. As for new features, the game risks little. The inclusion of the crime investigation system had potential, but it's so superficial that it really seems like parallel content, like a DLC experiment thrown into the campaign. The same goes for the new weapons and gadgets, which don't significantly change the experience. Everything sounds recycled, with few truly new ideas. A paradox for a title that sold itself as the beginning of the Dark Knight's journey. The player expects surprises, new mechanics, small innovations that show a Batman still in the learning phase. But what they find is a set of familiar functions, already mastered since the first Arkham Asylum. Even more discouraging is knowing that part of the planned content was simply cut. There were indications of more elaborate side missions, narrative connections with other villains, and even additional content focused on Robin that never saw the light of day. These details, revealed by developers and data miners, show that Arkham Origins could have been much bigger and more ambitious than what we saw. This feeling of something incomplete hangs over the game all the time, as if we were only experiencing a fraction of what it intended to be. The result is a title that mixes potential and frustration in equal measure, delivering an experience that wears out quickly, precisely because it wasn't developed to the end. Today, with the distance of time, Arkham Origins is remembered as much for its atmosphere as for its errors. It's not a disaster, but it's the most unstable link in the chain. The game that had the foundation to be great, but ended up a victim of haste and technical negligence. Reliving it in 2025 is to revisit a project with heart, but without polish, like a prototype of a classic that never got to happen. Its flaws are a reminder that, even in the big-budget industry, the technical factor is as important as the creative one, and Arkham Origins unfortunately stumbles on both. Arkham Origins had a rare opportunity within the franchise to tell a story about Batman's beginning without depending on the Joker as the centerpiece. The script started well in that regard, presenting Black Mask as a promising threat and a cast of villains who could easily carry the plot on their own. It was the ideal time to show Gotham's underworld and the chaos before the rise of the classic icons. However, at some point in development, the studio seemed to hesitate at the idea of a Batman game without the Joker as a dominant figure. And that's when everything fell apart narratively. The plot abandons its own ideas and returns to familiar territory, sacrificing originality in exchange for an emotional recycling that no longer had the same impact. The Joker's presence, while charismatic as ever, empties out the rest of the cast. Instead of being a punctual and symbolic appearance, he ends up swallowing the focus and transforming a story that should have been about formation into just another variation of the same old moral conflict. The game tries to justify this choice as the first encounter between Batman and his greatest enemy, but the way it's executed lacks freshness. It's clear that the story changes direction in the middle, almost as if someone behind the scenes had pushed to include the Joker for commercial safety. This robs the secondary villains of their strength and impoverishes the construction of Bruce himself, who loses a good part of his learning curve in the process. What hurts most about this decision is realizing the wasted potential of the other characters. Black Mask, who starts as an intriguing and unpredictable antagonist, is quickly relegated to a luxury supporting role. The same happens with assassins like Bane and Deathstroke, who could have represented complementary threats to Batman's psyche and strategy, but end up reduced to mechanical obstacles. And Bane's case is particularly symptomatic. He starts as one of the few villains who truly challenge the hero on a physical and psychological level. But his depth disappears when the plot shifts focus to someone else. The result is a set of encounters that are potent in isolation, but without lasting narrative weight. The introduction of Ben, a name that many fans today remember as a promising figure in the game's mythology, had the potential to bring a human and emotional counterpoint to the story. He could have been a mirror for Bruce, an ally in moral conflict, or even a victim of the consequences of this first year of vigilantism in Gotham. But the character is sidelined with the same haste as so many others. His presence is more symbolic than effective. The game mentions him, inserts him in certain moments of tension, but never develops him enough to make a mark on the player. This takes strength away from the narrative, which needed secondary figures with emotion and purpose to support the protagonist's arc. This lack of courage to follow its own path destroys what could have been the essence of Arkham Origins. The title had the chance to explore an isolated Batman, surrounded by enemies who still underestimate him, and show the shocks that shaped his philosophy. Instead, the plot falls into a déjà vu. Chaotic attacks by the Joker, predictable moral dilemmas, and a hero-villain relationship already explored in depth in previous stories. When the game tries to be emotional, it doesn't sound new. It sounds derivative. And this predictability is what turns a promising narrative into something merely functional. There is a clear mismatch between what the game intends to tell and what it actually delivers. The plot, which should show a Bruce in development, ends up depending on the figure of the Joker to create impact, as if the main character weren't self-sufficient. This weakens the proposal of showing a Batman at the beginning of his career, who still makes mistakes and learns. It's as if the Joker's presence functions as a narrative crutch, preventing the game from reaching new emotional territories. At the same tempo, the secondary villains, who could have built a rich network of conflicts and alliances, are wasted, reduced to disposable parts of the structure. In the end, Arkham Origins doesn't fail because it has the Joker. It fails because it depends on him. It's a game that was born with courage, but ended with fear. Its plot had the power to turn secondary villains into momentary protagonists and explore the lesser-known side of Bruce Wayne's mind. But it preferred the easier path, revisiting an icon already tested and approved. The result is a story that entertains but doesn't surprise. A game stuck in the past that looks at its own legacy with admiration but without daring. And maybe that's why, even after so many years, Arkham Origins still carries that bittersweet taste of a broken promise. Batman Arkham Origins gives me the feeling of a poorly cut rough diamond. It's the kind of game that is born loaded with good ideas, potent concepts, and an interesting point of view on the character, but that ends up stumbling in the execution of almost everything. From the beginning, it's clear there was a vision behind it, to show a more vulnerable, more tense Batman, and a Gotham in the midst of transformation. But this concept gets stuck between the desire to innovate and the fear of straying too far from what had already worked. Every element of the game carries potential, but none manages to truly flourish. It's full of promises that stop halfway, which makes it paradoxically fascinating and frustrating at the same time. The plot, for example, is a rich sketch of something that could have been memorable. The idea of a single night of chaos on Christmas Eve, with assassins hunting Batman in his most inexperienced phase, is worthy of a movie. The setting is dark. The Christmas atmosphere gives it a melancholic aura, and there are truly striking scenes. But the script gets lost in its pacing, diluting a strong premise into repetitive encounters and predictable twists. There's a feeling that the narrative didn't have time to breathe or be polished. Still, there are flashes of brilliance, specific dialogues, emotional scenes between Bruce and Alfred, and that almost mythological aesthetic that permeates the best stories of the character. The problem is that these flashes never turn into a fire. The idea of a remake doesn't just seem attractive to me, but necessary. A remake of Arkham Origins would be the perfect chance to rescue everything the game tried to be and finally deliver the definitive version of this story. With current technology, the level of detail, and the narrative maturity of the industry, it would be possible to fix the technical errors, redesign the missions, adjust the pacing, and give new life to the Gotham of that dark Christmas. The foundation is there, waiting to be polished. It would be a way to retell a story that always deserved more recognition, and to put the game in the place it should occupy within the Arkham trilogy. If this remake ever actually happens, I hope it's not just an aesthetic remaster. It needs to be an emotional and conceptual reconstruction, something that preserves the original spirit, but finally brings to fruition what was left half done. Arkham Origins deserves this second chance, not only for its importance within the Batman mythology, but because it represents that rare category of games that fail upwards. And these are the games that, when recreated with the right care, are usually reborn as true classics. I still have hope of seeing this happen, of reliving that frozen Gotham with the depth and weight it always deserved.
What?